Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I want to add one additional concern to many of the concerns that Anne Tolley raised arising from these hearings, and it is to do with the understanding of many of the people who deal with the Official Information Act as to how the Official Information Act works and how it should work. And I think it's very important that we draw a clear distinction between official information, information that is official information with grounds to withhold it, and information that is not official information. Because in the case of ministerial emails, there will often be information that is official information but with grounds to withhold, and then there will be information exchanged using those email accounts, for example, that is not official information. A minister arranging with a member of their family to have dinner over email, that is not official information. It is not covered by the Official Information Act, and therefore it's simply not part of the consideration. But there will be emails that ministers exchange between each other, or between themselves and officials, or between themselves and others, which is official information, but under the Act there are grounds to withhold it. I think they're really important, and what really struck me was that many of the people dealing with these issues didn't understand that distinction. The other thing that they didn't necessarily understand the distinction of was that the vehicle of communication doesn't alter the status of the information. So a minister exchanging official information using a Hotmail account doesn't make it not official information. It's still official information. And I think that was really important, because we ended up in quite an extensive discussion in that meeting, including with Mr Dunn, where there seemed to be this distinction that suggests that because one type of email account was used over another, that changed the nature of the information. It doesn't. Official information is official information. Simple as that. It doesn't matter how it's communicated, it's still official information. And the reason that that's very important, I think, in terms of the committee's future deliberations, because one of the challenges for ministerial email accounts is you have to have a mechanism for determining what within them is official information covered by the IA and what is not. And I don't think we've got an adequate mechanism for doing that at the moment, and that's part of the issue. But also, what became very apparent during our considerations of the Henry inquiry is the Henry inquiry could have obtained, possibly, legally, much of the information that he sought simply by lodging an Official Information Act request. And they never did it. They never actually used the available channel to them to obtain the information that they were looking for. And that suggests a level of a real lack of understanding by those who were conducting the inquiry into how things should unfold and happen. But we've got to bring ourselves now. Well, before I talk about some other issues, I want to talk about what this report doesn't do. Because actually, I think everybody who saw this go off to the Privileges Committee and who was eagerly awaiting this report still has one question, one fundamental question that hasn't been answered. Who actually did it? Because the Privileges Committee was specifically prevented by the terms of reference given to us from actually looking at who did it. Now, the evidence overwhelmingly points in one direction. But the committee was unable to look into that. And one of the things that I think Mr Dunn in his evidence certainly displayed was a total lack of remorse for any of his actions in this entire saga. And I think people who have had their emails hacked or accessed completely unfairly have grounds to feel aggrieved. Someone who has been accused of leaking confidential government information and has failed to dispel that and is still the prime suspect and is refusing to cooperate with an investigation to determine whether or not he did it, does not have any grounds to stand on his high horse and complain about the way he was treated. Because all of the evidence still points to the fact that on the balance of probabilities, Peter Dunn probably did it. And yet he's now on his high horse and claiming that he's been unfairly treated. That's not right. It's simply wrong. Peter Dunn probably did it, and all of the evidence seems to suggest that. And what's really interesting is that Peter Dunn came out, and one of the reasons that this has become a lot more political since the report came out, is that Peter Dunn came out and claimed the report vindicated him. It didn't. This report does not vindicate Peter Dunn at all, because in fact the people writing the report, the Privileges Committee, were specifically excluded from being able to look into whether he did it or not. Actually, I think all of the evidence we heard still points in Peter Dunn's direction. And the reason all this is important, of course, is that we've now got the Prime Minister leaving the door open to Peter Dunn coming back as a minister. Now, the question for John Key is a very, very simple one. If he's willing to have Peter Dunn back in the executive, back as a minister, is he comfortable that Peter Dunn didn't leak the report? Because if he's not comfortable that Peter Dunn didn't leak the report, he has no grounds in saying that he should be a minister. If a minister cannot be trusted not to leak confidential government information, particularly security-related information, they have no place being a minister. And why is John Key leaving the door open to Peter Dunn? It's basically because he's that desperate to cling on to power. He's quite happy to have Peter Dunn, a known leaker in his ministry, quite happy to be propped up by that convicted criminal John Banks, and that shows very clearly how desperate this government are to cling into power. One of the things that was very concerning in the inquiry that the Privileges Committee undertook was the level. Was when we got into the timeline, we got into who did what to whom and who said what when, it became very, very clear that there was high-level pressure on parliamentary services from the Prime Minister's office. Ultimately, why did this information get released? Well, there are two reasons. One was incompetence on the part of the inquiry. They went directly to junior staff and they asked directly for the information. They shouldn't have done that. They should have had followed the appropriate channels in obtaining the information, so the inquiry bears some responsibility. But the second reason that a lot of this information was released wrongly was that pressure was applied by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and by the Head of Ministerial Services for that information to be released. They share responsibility for the problems. John Key said, when someone speaks to my Chief of Staff, they speak to me. And his Chief of Staff was one of the key people implicated in the release of this information. He made it very, very clear to the Parliamentary Service that he expected the information to be released. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and therefore by John Key's own definition, the Prime Minister himself, were involved in applying pressure for this information to be released. And I think that is something that we need to take very, very seriously, because the Prime Minister and the Parliamentary Service holds a lot of information that the Prime Minister has no responsibility for. The Parliamentary Service hold all of the information to do with the opposition. And are we comfortable with the idea that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff could exert pressure onto Parliamentary Service to just dictate what they do with our information, the opposition's information? That's not democracy. In fact, it's an affront to democracy. Would we be comfortable with the idea of the Prime Minister or his Chief of Staff exerting pressure and influence to do with the release of information held by the Parliamentary Service around journalists or other users of the building? Fundamentally, no. It's wrong. And in fact, it's dangerous to democracy. What's dangerous to democracy is that it's been allowed to happen. But what's more dangerous to democracy is the fact that the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And all the way through this Privileges Committee hearing, not once did the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff admit that they had exerted undue influence on the Parliamentary Service to release information that they shouldn't have been. And I think the Prime Minister needs to front up and accept his share of responsibility for this. He set the terms of reference for the inquiry. He didn't set the terms of reference properly and well, and the inquiry was doomed to fail from the beginning. He then did, and the interference of his Chief of Staff in the process then led to the inquiry receiving information wrongly that it shouldn't have, and John Key needs to accept his share of responsibility for that as well. And Peter Dunn is not vindicated by this report. Peter Dunn should not be reinstated as a minister because all of the evidence still points in his direction. The odds are Peter Dunn almost certainly leaked the report. And I tell you what, Mr. Speaker, there's a condition with parole, right? When someone comes up before the parole board, one of the things they look for is whether that person admits they've done something wrong and shows regret. Peter Dunn shows no remorse for the fact that he leaked this information, so he shouldn't be reinstated as a minister.
Honourable Phil Goff.